Hey, good morning. Glad to welcome you to our online service this morning. It's Palm Sunday, and you know what? That's the first day of Holy Week. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little bit on how my mind works sometimes. I don't know, you might be a little bit like me where you're a numbers person. I was thinking about Jesus, and I was thinking about, okay, Jesus lived, for 33 years. How many weeks is that? Well, just doing the simple math, that's 1,716 weeks that Jesus was alive. So this 1 week, what is this percentage, of this 1 week in Jesus' entire life? Well, here you go. It's 0.05% of Jesus' life. And why does that matter? Well, I was thinking, man, how much of the Gospels is about this 1 week? Just this little percentage of Jesus' life, how much is that in the Gospels? Well, I figured it out, and so I did a little research, and here it is. Matthew has 28.9% of, the Holy Week is the book of Matthew. That's almost, a quarter of the book. Mark has 37.5, almost a third. Luke, 19%, and John, 43%. That's crazy to me. That's almost half of the gospel is about this 1 week in Jesus' life. It's an important week for us as Christians to think about this week. And I was thinking about, okay, this is a lot of percentage. How much about the other big holiday that we celebrate, Christmas? How much of the Gospels is about that? Well, it's only, here we go, 2%. 2% of the Gospels are about the beginning of Jesus' life, and all of this about this 1 week in Jesus' life. Man, it's really an important week. And I don't know what you have planned this week for your Holy Week celebration. We have a lot of things going on here at church, and we hope that you participate. But really today I want to talk about that first day, and that's Palm Sunday, the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem and really announced this kingdom that was coming, this kingdom of love. I'd like to tell this story. The one that I settled on was found in Luke chapter 19. And I'd like just to tell this story to you. I'll use some of the verses as well as we think about it together. But this comes from Luke's gospel, and it's found in Luke chapter 19. So I want you to imagine yourself and put yourself into this story today. Imagine that you are one of Jesus' disciples. And you've been traveling with Jesus now for 3 years, and here you are in this small town near the Mount of Olives. You wake up in the morning, and Jesus gives you a very strange request. He tells a couple of your fellow disciples that says, hey, I want you to go over to this other village near the Mount of Olives, and I want you to you're going to find a donkey there, all right? And this donkey's going to be tied up. And I want you to untie that donkey and bring it back to me. Now, my personality, I would say, no way, Jesus. I don't want any part of stealing a donkey. So maybe a couple of your other fellow disciples would think, that sounds pretty adventurous to me. I'm going to go try that. But I do have one question, Jesus. If, the owner of the donkey shows up, what do we say? And Jesus says, just tell them that the Lord has need of it. Or some of the other gospels say the master has need of it. And I kind of imagine in my head kind of this Jedi trick, the master has need of it. And then they just go for it. Well, the disciples go and they find this donkey tied up. They untie it. And sure enough, the owner asks them, what are you doing? And they respond just like Jesus asked them to. And they take the donkey with them. When they arrive back to where Jesus is at, here they have this donkey. They're excited. They're getting ready to go into Jerusalem through the Mount of Olives. And there's a story that starts playing through their minds. And to kind of set this up, I thought I'd give you a little background on maybe what it was like to be a Jewish person living in that day, which the disciples were. You see, if you were a Jewish person living that day, you saw the events happening in your life. You saw those events as kind of unfolding of other stories that you knew from the Scripture. See, most of the people that lived were illiterate. Yet they heard the scriptures being read, and so the stories of the Exodus, the stories of the kings, the stories of the prophets were being recited to them. And so they would remember these stories, and whenever things were happening, events of the day were happening, they often would see this as fulfillment or continuations of those stories. And it's a pretty neat thing to think about that. But I bring that up because the disciples perhaps remembered the words of the prophet Zechariah. As they arrived with this donkey, they remembered these words, where the prophet said this. They said, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly or humble, and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." You see, when they brought this donkey to Jesus, perhaps they remembered this story and they thought, whoa, this is what's happening. This is exactly what is happening in our lives today. We've been traveling with Jesus for 3 years now. We've seen the things that Jesus can do. We've seen that Jesus has the power to heal people from, amazing diseases. We've seen that Jesus has the power of God. I mean, it's got to be the power of God because we've seen Jesus actually raise people from the dead. And so this is our Messiah. We believe that Jesus is our Messiah, and this is the time. The time has finally come. We're riding into Jerusalem. We're going to be free from our oppressors, the Romans. And this is going on in their minds. And, there's this big picture idea. All of us humans have really in common that's going on, because really when we hear this story, we see ourselves in the story of Scripture, don't we? What was happening with the disciples, I think, happens in our lives, and it's this. What we've experienced before often affects what we see today. What we've experienced before often affects what we've seen today, and the other part of that is this can cause either insight or blindness. Boy, when I think about this phrase here, what we've experienced before, what it meant for the disciples that day was they had experienced the story of Scripture, the prophets, the kings, the Exodus story, and all those things that they had experienced was affecting what they saw today. And we'll see as we unfold the Palm Sunday story that this was causing in their lives either insight or blindness. And for the people in that day, it definitely caused a sense of blindness because they interpreted what was happening today based on what they had known before. And, I was thinking about ourselves today. We don't ever do that, do we? Do we ever interpret things that are happening today based on things that maybe we read before in the Bible? That happens all the time today. People are making guesses, and sometimes there's another another phrase for that people use. They use the phrase confirmation bias. The disciples were already thinking this way, and then as things were coming in, they started making assumptions based on what they knew before. And I think people are still probably doing that today. And so when the disciples they start coming into Jerusalem, they hear something. They hear the chanting crowd that starts saying these words, again, words that they knew from the Psalms, and it's found in Luke 19:38 that people were quoting Psalm 118 when they said, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Boy, when they heard those words, the disciples started to think, oh, yeah, this is happening. This is confirming once again that Jesus is the one who's going to rescue us from our oppressors. Jesus is our hero. And then they see children waving palm branches. And that's where we get the name for Palm Sunday, that these children and people on the sides of the road are waving the palm branches. And this, again, is another story that the Jewish people held in their hearts because it goes back to the time of Moses, when Moses brought the people out of bondage from Egypt. God had commanded them to wave palm branches around the altar of God. This was to commemorate what God had done in their lives, that God had brought them out of bondage and into something new, something called freedom. And so here the disciples see this, and again, it's just confirming once again that this is happening. Then they have the people that are standing along the side. They start taking off their outer garments and they spread them out on the road in front of the donkey, so that Jesus has this like multicolored carpet of sorts to ride upon. And this goes back to 1 Kings, when the people of the day back in ancient Israel took off their robes and laid them in front of the king. And so as they are, every one of these actions, the palms, the coats, the donkey, everything is kind of pointing to this picture of something new is happening, that Jesus is not just this prophet, from Nazareth. Jesus is actually the Messiah. Jesus is the one who's going to rescue them. Jesus is actually the king. So this is an exciting time. And, I just wonder if you can imagine putting yourself in that situation, how you might feel in that moment. Well, there's another part of this story that another crew comes in, and it's the religious leaders. They see what's happening, they hear what's happening, and they get a little fearful, is what's happening here. The religious leaders come and they hear the crowds chanting, and they're afraid. They're afraid that if the Romans hear, they might come and make some trouble. And so they go to Jesus and they ask him, Jesus, will you just get people to calm down? Will you just get them to quiet down? And Jesus responds with this, is in verse 40 of Luke 19. He says to them, I tell you, he replied, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. Wow. Jesus has this way of just putting people in their place, doesn't he? Well, let's just pause for a moment. Let's just absorb this whole scene. We have Jesus coming in from the east into Jerusalem, and people are cheering. There's palm branches. I don't know what words come to your mind or what feelings come to your mind, but I would guess that you would feel like really excited. It's like a parade type atmosphere where you're feeling you feel like your team's about to win, and people are excited and they're cheering. And there's a lot of joy. And in the midst of this scene, something happens. And as I read through the story, what happened next really kind of blew my mind. And we read about it in verses 41, 42. As Jesus approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it. Wow. And he said this, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. What would bring you peace? That was the desire of the hearts of the people that day. But now it is hidden from your eyes because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Now it is hidden from your eyes. Man, that's a really powerful statement. And the contrast really here is stark. You have all this jubilation going on, and then you have Jesus in the middle weeping when he sees Jerusalem laid out in front of him. And that word weep, it really conveys a strong, strong emotional reaction, doesn't it? It's not just, I just cried a few tears, I'm wiping them away. It's this brokenheartedness. And I just had to pause for a little bit and just consider, why was Jesus weeping? Why was Jesus so brokenhearted as he saw this city and the people that he had come to love so much? And the way that I thought of it was this. Have you ever been in a situation where you wish things could be different, but somehow you know that they just won't be different? And it causes within you a reaction that's very deep, that causes this emotional reaction within you. This is kind of what came to mind as I thought about that in my own life. I was 18 years old. I just graduated high school. I'd had a busy summer, after finishing high school. I worked 2 jobs, and I didn't have a lot of margin in my life, of course. I just burned the candle on both ends. So I didn't really save much energy for what was going to happen next and to really know what emotion was going to come out of me. And it was the day that I was leaving my home for college. And, my home was a special place growing up. I got a picture of it here. This is my boyhood home. And as you can see, it's this beautiful farmhouse in a beautiful, we had 20 acres of farmland. We had 2 barns. It was a wonderful place for me to spend my high school years. I just had tons and tons of memories there. But this place has special significance in my family because I'll tell you what, my mom came from a place in her life where she didn't have much. She came from a broken home, and it was her dream to be able to have a place like this, to be able to have a farm that she could call her own and raise things like chickens and goats and all the things that we had there, and had dogs and cats. This was a culmination of her dream. She actually loved this place so much she gave it a name. It was called Stone Rose Meadow. She had a sign made that was out front. Well, back to my story, my part of it. I was getting in the car, getting ready to go to college, which was out of state. I had packed my bags, and I got inside the car, and as we were driving away and I looked back at that house, there was something that happened within me. I felt it right there. It was this lump, started in my gut and worked its way up, and it was like I couldn't even stop the emotion that was going to come. I just burst forth in tears, and I remember being embarrassed about that because I was riding with a friend of mine at the time, but nothing I could do would stop the emotion coming out. The feeling that I had at that time was this. I had the feeling that what I hoped for, going to college and fulfilling my dreams, all the things that I had hoped for, I wanted all that, but I also wanted the safety and security and the love that I felt of my home. And what I knew in that moment was, you know what? Something's changing, and it's never going to be the same. I wished that things could be different. I wished that I could have all of that, but, it wasn't to be. And I think about Jesus' story. In that moment when he was weeping over Jerusalem, Jesus had traveled with his disciples for 3 years. He had laughed with them. He had spent time with them. He had loved his disciples. He had loved the people who had come to see him. Jesus had spent so much energy healing people, teaching, spending time with people, and being there for the underdog and for the undermined. That's what Jesus did. Yet in this moment, we see a very human side of Jesus. We see Jesus overcome with this human emotion that those who he loved, they didn't get it. They didn't get it in that moment. And I think just like I did on that day when I was leaving home, I wish things would be different. I think here we see this deeply human side of Jesus, wishing things could be different, but knowing that they're not going to be different. It's so hard when we find ourselves in that place where what we had hoped for, like it might be me holding on to home and the college adventure, or like Jesus, hoping that those that you loved were somehow going to get your purpose. They were going to somehow understand. It's so hard when we find ourselves hoping for something to be different, but knowing that it can't be. And I wonder, why was Jesus weeping? Really because there was this disconnect happening. There was a disconnect happening with what he was doing in his life, his purpose, and the reaction of the people that day. Because, and this is the first thing I want to point out in our notes and make an application for us, is that on Palm Sunday, here's what the people saw. The people saw a hero who would overthrow their oppressors. That's what the people were seeing. And Jesus was weeping for that. He was weeping that because he knew that he wasn't there to fulfill their dream that day, their dream of what they thought was going to happen. They imagined that there was going to be this one hero. Jesus wasn't the first person they imagined this to be, but he was one of them. He was like the latest one. And they imagined Jesus has come to be our hero. He's the one who's going to bring justice and peace, and it's going to come through political conquest. It's going to come and it's going to look like defeat for our oppressor, the Romans. And the outcome of that is going to be this freedom that we're going to have. Culturally and religiously, we're going to have the freedom to be us. And they really believe that, this is what God has for them. This is God's will for my life. And this was what I was meant to be. And when I hear that story, I definitely find myself in there. I feel like, man, are we unlike the people in that crowd that day? Do you ever find yourself in this type of story? Where we see God as the hero who's going to rescue us in the same way, rescue us in this moment. That maybe if we just pray hard enough, or if we read the Bible enough, or somehow if we just can drum up more faith, then somehow God's going to show up and he's going to be the hero and he's going to miracle me out of my difficult situations in my life. And I think about like a common thing we all have, like a family relational issue. You might have a disagreement or a serious relational issue with someone like a parent or maybe a spouse. Or maybe you have, an angsty teen in your house and you wish that God would just show up and somehow just make it all better. Be the hero. I don't have to really do anything about it, but you're going to do it, Jesus. So just show up and do this for me. And you know what? Maybe we feel like maybe God would rescue us from, whatever we might be worried about in our culture happening today or politically. We think, man, God's on our side. And you know what? He's going to rescue me out of this. But is that what Jesus was hoping for that day? When Jesus rode in on this donkey, is that what Jesus was hoping for? This is what I think Jesus was. On Palm Sunday, Jesus was hoped for co-participants in healing for the world. That's what I believe Jesus was looking for that day. As he rode in, he knew that his mission was somehow bigger than just what was happening right there, right then. It wasn't just to take that away, but there was a bigger thing going on. And that was, he was hoping for co-participants in the healing for the world. Jesus imagined this kingdom of love and peace was not just for the people gathered there on the sides of that road on that day in Jerusalem on the outskirts as he came from the east, coming from the Mount of Olives. It wasn't just for that. No, this kingdom was actually a kingdom that would have no boundaries on time or space or people. This kingdom would be rooted not in things of like political conquest. This kingdom would be rooted in words like forgiveness, in peace, true internal peace. It would be rooted in love for God, and that love spelled out for others. In fact, I love what Jesus said, when talking about what was the most important thing. In Luke 10:27, Jesus said this, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So, when I think about this idea of what Jesus hoped for on Palm Sunday, what does it look like to be a participant in the kingdom of love? What does it look like to, be working with God? Not just hoping that God will be the hero, but actually coming alongside and being alongside God in what he's doing. What does it look like to participate? What does it look like to be co-participators in God's healing for the world? I think about the situations that I mentioned earlier, and you think about that difficult relationship maybe that you're having with your spouse or with a family member. And you think, well, what is my part in it? How can God come alongside of what I'm doing, or I come alongside of what God's doing in their life, and I'm participating in this? It's not just God doing it, but I have a role too. What about an overwhelming financial situation? Man, a lot of people have struggled with that. The question is this: What is mine to do as a co-participant in the kingdom of love? What is mine to do? How do I participate in what God is doing? The message just wasn't for those on Palm Sunday that day. The message is really for all of us, for all of time. I really think it's pretty cool that we have the whole story, of course. And maybe people on that day, they didn't quite understand what was going on. Maybe they misinterpreted, the current things that were going on based on what they thought they knew about it. But later on, Jesus' followers, they actually would get it. And they would begin to live out this message of love and peace, the kingdom of love that surpasses no matter who's in charge politically, that this kingdom could reign within a group of people. And I think about the disciple John who said these words. And these words, I think, are really beautiful. They really capture the essence of what the kingdom of love is all about. He says this, is, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." And the most important value in the kingdom is love. So, Palm Sunday, what a celebration. The thing that comes to my mind as I think about what Palm Sunday probably looked like, the thing that I can relate to is a parade. When I was a kid growing up in a small town, I loved parades. I loved to go. There was a certain excitement of just being around all your neighbors and your friends and seeing everyone mingle together. There was a sense of community, wasn't there? So this week I posted on social media, on Facebook, I asked the question this. I said, what's your favorite part of a small town parade? I was kind of overwhelmed with the answers. Apparently, I really hit a nerve because people love parades. There was 125 different comments on this one post as people just talked about all their favorite things. I love some of your responses. People said, I loved fire trucks. I loved seeing the classic cars. A lot of people said they loved watching the high school marching band. Boy, I can kind of hear it right now, those drums. People love seeing animals in parade, like horses. Or what about those go-karts with the guys, grown men with the silly hats, driving around? Those are a lot of fun. But the number one answer was candy. People love to receive candy being thrown at them. And man, that was one of my favorite things, definitely. But then there was another answer that some people said, and it was really cool. Some people said, what I really like about being a parade is being in the parade. I liked being in the parade. I liked to be the one who was waving to the crowd. I liked to be the one who was throwing the candy out. And it reminds me of this story that I heard this week about Bob Goff, who's a Christian author. And, Bob has found a really unique way of loving God and loving his neighbors. And this is what he's done every year for the last 25 or 26 years. At his home in California, they have a New Year's parade just for their neighborhood. And there's one really unique thing about this parade. In this parade, there's no spectators. In this parade, as you can see here, here's a picture of this. Man, I'd love to be in San Diego on New Year's Day. Everyone's in the parade. In fact, they're encouraged as neighbors. Everybody knows that if you see one of your neighbors there on the side just spectating, you're encouraged to go over and encourage them to get in the parade and to be a part of that. And as I heard that story, I thought about the message of Palm Sunday. The message of Palm Sunday for us this year as we think about, a parade is not to be a spectator, not to be the one who's hoping for someone to hero me out of my situation or something, that Jesus will just cause a miracle and make everything better. But to realize I'm not a spectator in this parade of the kingdom of love. I am actually invited by God to be a co-participant and to be able to link arms with what God is doing and to make a difference in the world today. The kingdom of love that started on Palm Sunday, begins in the same place that I believe that it began then, and that it begins in our hearts. And it begins by making a difference in loving God and then playing that out by loving others as well. Well, I love this message about Palm Sunday. I'd love to hear your thoughts and let us know how this message has impacted you and what you're going to do maybe even this week and think about, man, what is really stirred up in my heart to participate in what God is doing in my life. If you have something tough going on, we'd love to hear about that. We'd love to pray with you as well and to help you explore how you can really invite God into those spaces and see God work in a great way. Let me just say a prayer blessing over you. God, I'm grateful today for Palm Sunday, and I'm grateful for what Jesus did on that day as he came into the city and he imagined it being a certain way. This kingdom of love, God, not only is given to the people of that day, but it's poured out to our hearts as well today. Continue to make yourself real to us as we unpack this in our lives and in our church, in our community. God, be with us this week as we celebrate this most holy of weeks. We're grateful that we have Jesus and that we have his love in our hearts. In his name I pray, amen. See you next week, church.